The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Sarai West's tiny apartment as her alarm clock buzzed loudly. She reached over and turned it off, sighing as she stretched her arms above her head. Another day, another dollar. At 26, Sarai had learned that life wasn't about big dreams or fairy tales. It was about survival. She shuffled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face as she looked in the mirror. Her dark skin glowed even without makeup, and her eyes, though tired, held a quiet determination that had gotten her through the toughest times in her life. "Okay, Sarai," she said to her reflection, "let's get through today." The bus ride to Atlanta Women's Care Clinic was the same as always. 40 minutes, 3 stops, and plenty of time to read another chapter of the paperback novel she kept in her purse. By the time she arrived at the clinic, Sarai had her professional smile firmly in place. "Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds," she said, greeting the elderly woman who came in every Tuesday for her blood pressure check. "Dr. Martinez will be with you in just a few minutes." Sarai had been working as a receptionist at the OB/GYN clinic for almost 3 years now. The pay wasn't great, but the staff had become something close to family, the closest thing to family she'd had since aging out of the foster care system at 18. "Sarai, honey, can you file these for me?" asked Nurse Betty, dropping a stack of folders on the reception desk. "And Dr. Reynolds wants to know if you can stay late tonight. We've got that fertility demonstration for the new residents." Sarai nodded. "Sure, it's not like I have big plans anyway." Her evenings usually consisted of TV dinners and studying for the healthcare management courses she was taking online. One day at a time, she reminded herself. One step at a time. Across town, in a gleaming high-rise office with a view of the Atlanta skyline, Christopher Vale stared at his computer screen, barely listening to the marketing presentation happening in front of him. Chris, are you with us?" His business partner, Marcus, was looking at him expectantly. "Sorry," Christopher said, straightening in his leather chair. "Just thinking about the Davis account." That was a lie. He'd been thinking about the call he'd received from his father that morning. The same old pressure, the same old disappointment. At 30, Christopher had built Vale Technologies into one of the most successful tech startups in the Southeast. His innovative security software had made him millions, but in his father's eyes, he was still failing. At the most important job, continuing the Vale family legacy. "Son," his father had said over the phone, his voice dripping with Southern aristocracy despite the early hour, "your mother and I are concerned about this procedure you're planning." Christopher pinched the bridge of his nose. "Dad, it's just a routine operation. The doctors say—" "The doctors don't understand what's at stake here," his father interrupted. "The Vale name has been prominent in Georgia for 5 generations. I won't have it end with you because of some reckless skiing accident. The accident had happened 6 months ago. A torn ligament, some nerve damage. The surgery had a small risk, very small, of affecting his fertility. But his father had blown it out of proportion, insisting that Christopher store his sperm just in case. Fine, Christopher had finally agreed, more to end the conversation than anything else. "I've already made the deposit at Atlanta Cryobank. Happy now?" His father had hung up without saying goodbye. Typical. The meeting ended, and Christopher retreated to his office, loosening his expensive tie as he stared out at the city below. Sometimes he wondered what it would be like to just be normal, to not carry the weight of a family name, a family fortune, a family legacy. His phone buzzed. A text from his younger sister Eliza. "Dad on your case again? Hang in there, bro. Dinner Sunday?" Christopher smiled slightly. At least Eliza understood. She'd escaped most of the pressure by getting married young to a man their father approved of. But as the only son, Christopher had never had that luxury. He texted back, "You know it. Sunday." "Works. Bring wine." Back at the clinic, Sarai was filing the last of the day's paperwork when Dr. Reynolds appeared in the doorway of her office. "Sarai, I need a huge favor," she said, looking frazzled. Her grey hair was escaping from its usual neat bun. "Jennifer just called in sick, and she was supposed to be our demonstration subject for the fertility procedure today." Sarai looked up, confused. "I don't understand. What do you need me to do?" "It's just a demonstration," Dr. Reynolds explained. "We have new residents observing, and it's a simple mock insemination procedure. Nothing actually happens. We use saline solution, not real samples. But, Sarai began. I know it's not in your job description, Dr. Reynolds said quickly, but we're desperate, and it would just be lying on the table while I demonstrate the equipment and procedure. You'd be fully draped, completely professional. Sarai hesitated. Dr. Reynolds had been good to her, giving her this job when her resume was thin and her references non-existent. And it was just a demonstration. Okay, she agreed. What do I need to do? 20 minutes later, Sarai found herself in an examination room wearing a paper gown and trying not to feel too awkward, as 4 young residents stood at the foot of the table watching Dr. Reynolds explain the procedure. The patient would already have undergone hormone therapy at this point, Dr. Reynolds was saying, and we would have thawed the selected donor sample. Now I'm just using a saline solution for demonstration purposes. Sarai tried to zone out, staring at the ceiling tiles and counting backward from 100. It was a trick she'd learned in foster care when she needed to mentally escape uncomfortable situations. She barely noticed when the clinic's office manager knocked on the door and called Dr. Reynolds out for an urgent phone call. One of the other nurses stepped in, continuing the demonstration. What Sarai didn't see was the confusion that followed. Dr. Reynolds had been juggling multiple responsibilities that day, including preparing actual donor samples for 2 wealthy clients who were scheduled for real procedures the following morning. In her haste to return to the demonstration, she grabbed the wrong syringe, one containing a real sample rather than saline. When Sarai left the clinic that evening, she had no idea that her life had just changed forever. 2 weeks passed, and Sarai began to feel off, tired, nauseous in the mornings, sensitive to smells. She blamed it on stress and the extra hours she'd been putting in at the clinic. But when she missed her period, a cold fear gripped her. Impossible, she whispered to herself in the bathroom of her apartment, staring at the pregnancy test in her hand. But there it was, 2 pink lines, clear as day. Sarai sat on the edge of the bathtub, her mind racing. She hadn't been with anyone in over a year. The last relationship had ended badly. Just another guy who saw her as convenient, not committed. Since then, she'd been focused on work and school. There was no way she could be pregnant, unless, no, that was crazy. The demonstration had been just that, a demonstration, with saline solution, not real sperm. But as the days passed and the symptoms continued, Sarai couldn't shake the suspicion. Finally, she approached Dr. Reynolds after hours, her heart pounding. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Reynolds looked up from her paperwork, surprised. Of course, Sarai. What is it? I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between them. And there's no way I could be unless... Dr. Reynolds' face went pale. That's impossible. The demonstration was just saline. Could there have been a mix-up? Sarai asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. What followed was a nightmare of internal investigations, hushed meetings, and horrifying revelations. There had indeed been a mix-up. During the demonstration, in the confusion of the day, Sarai had been inseminated with a real donor sample, one belonging to a wealthy client who had stored his sperm before a medical procedure. A client named Christopher Vale. This is a disaster, said the clinic's lawyer, a stern woman named Ms. Patel during a closed-door meeting. Mr. Vale is not just any client. His family is extremely prominent. What are my options? Sarai asked, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. The clinic is prepared to cover all medical expenses, Ms. Patel said carefully, and we would understand if you chose to terminate. No, Sarai said firmly. The word surprised even her. She hadn't had time to process everything, but something deep inside her had already made that decision. That's not an option for me. Then, we need to inform Mr. Vale, said Dr. Reynolds, looking years older than she had just days ago. Legally, he has a right to know. And then what? Sarai asked, fear creeping into her voice for the first time. Nobody had an answer for her. Christopher was in the middle of a board meeting when his personal assistant slipped into the room and placed a note in front of him. Urgent call from Atlanta Women's Care Clinic. His first thought was of his sister. Eliza was a patient there, and she and her husband had been trying for a baby. Had something happened? "Excuse me," he said, standing abruptly. "I need to take this." In his office, with the door closed, Christopher picked up the phone. "This is Christopher Vale." "Mr. Vale, this is Dr. Reynolds from Atlanta Women's Care Clinic. I'm afraid I have some difficult news." Christopher held her hand as she breathed through the pain, feeling helpless but determined to be strong for her. When the contraction passed, he showed her the journal. "Tasha found this at the clinic," he explained. "She thought you might want it." Sarai smiled weakly. "I was worried I'd lost it. Our daughter should know her story." "I read some of it," Christopher admitted. "On the way in, your letters to her. They're beautiful, Sarai." Before she could respond, Dr. Martinez entered the room. "Well, look who made it just in time," she said, smiling at Christopher. "Let's check your progress, Sarai." After examining her, Dr. Martinez nodded. "It's time to push with the next contraction. This baby is ready to meet her parents." What followed was the most intense, terrifying, and miraculous hour of Christopher's life. He held Sarai's hand, supported her back, whispered encouragements as she worked harder than he'd ever seen anyone work. Her strength amazed him. This woman who had faced life alone for so long, now bringing their child into the world with the same quiet determination she brought to everything. "I can see the head," Dr. Martinez announced. "One more big push, Sarai." Sarai looked at Christopher, exhaustion and fear in her eyes. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. Christopher leaned close, pressing his forehead to hers. "You can. You're the strongest person I've ever known. One more push and we'll meet our daughter." Sarai gripped his hand tighter. "I don't need your name," she said, her voice trembling, "but I might need your hand." "You have it," Christopher promised. "Always." With the next contraction, Sarai gathered her remaining strength and pushed. There was a moment of intense pressure, then release, followed by the most beautiful sound Christopher had ever heard, the indignant cry of his newborn daughter. "She's here," Dr. Martinez announced, lifting the tiny, squirming body for them to see. A perfect little girl. Tears streamed down Sarai's face as the baby was placed on her chest, still wet and crying, a nurse quickly covering them both with a warm blanket. "Hello, beautiful," Sarai whispered, touching the baby's cheek with a trembling finger. "We've been waiting for you." Christopher stared in wonder at the tiny face, the perfect fingers, the dark hair already forming damp curls against her head. His daughter. Their daughter. A life they'd created, not by choice or plan, but by fate's strange hand. "She's amazing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like her mother." Sarai looked up at him, her face radiant despite the exhaustion. "Thank you for getting here in time." "I wouldn't have missed it," Christopher said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Not for anything in the world." After the baby was cleaned, weighed, and wrapped in a hospital blanket, the nurse brought her back to Sarai. 6 pounds, 4 ounces, a little small but perfect in every way. Christopher sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Sarai, both of them gazing at their daughter. "She needs a name," Sarai said softly. They'd discussed names before but hadn't settled on one. Now, looking at their daughter's face, Christopher knew. "Hope," he said. "Hope West Vale." Sarai smiled, tears in her eyes. "It's perfect." "West for your legacy," Christopher explained. "Vale for mine, but hope for what she's brought us both." Later, after Sarai had been moved to a recovery room and the initial flurry of nurses and doctors had subsided, they had a moment alone as a family. Sarai dozed in the hospital bed, exhausted from the long labor. Christopher sat in the chair beside her, holding Hope in his arms. He marveled at the tiny weight of her, the way her hand curled around his finger, the soft sound of her breathing. Everything about her seemed miraculous. "I promise you'll never doubt how much you're wanted," he whispered to his sleeping daughter. "No matter how you came into our lives, you were meant to be ours." As the evening wore on, visitors came and went. Tasha stopped by with flowers. Eliza arrived with a teddy bear nearly as big as the baby. Even Dr. Reynolds from the clinic made an appearance, her face a mixture of joy and lingering guilt over the mix-up that had brought them all here. But noticeably absent was Harrison Vale. Christopher had called his parents home, left a message about the birth of their granddaughter. But the grand oak doors of the Vale estate remained closed, at least for now. He'll come around, Eliza assured her brother. Once he sees her, holds her, how could he not love her? Christopher wasn't so sure, but looking at his daughter's peaceful face, he found he didn't care as much as he thought he would. His father's approval, once the driving force of his life, seemed suddenly less important than the approval of the tiny person in his arms. As night fell and the hospital quieted, Sarai woke to find Christopher still in the chair beside her bed, Hope asleep on his chest. His head had fallen forward, his own eyes closed in exhaustion. One hand rested protectively on the baby's back, securing her even in sleep. The sight brought tears to Sarai's eyes. This man, this privileged, complicated man who had entered her life through the strangest of circumstances, had become her partner, her protector, her love. Watching him with their daughter, she saw none of the Vale wealth or power, none of the corporate CEO or society heir, just a father overcome with love for his child. "Christopher," she called softly. He stirred, lifting his head. The moment he saw she was awake, his face brightened. "Hey," he said, his voice husky with sleep. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, tired." "Happy," Sarai answered honestly. "How is she?" Christopher looked down at the baby still sleeping peacefully, against him. "Perfect. She hasn't made a sound. I think she likes me." Sarai smiled. She knows her daddy. The word hung between them, full of meaning. Daddy. A role neither of them had experienced from the receiving end. A role Christopher had never expected to fill so soon, if ever. "I was thinking," Christopher said, adjusting Hope slightly in his arms, "about what happens next." Sarai tensed slightly. "What do you mean?" "When you two come home. To our home." He hesitated. "I want to make it official, Sarai, all of it." "Official how?" Sarai asked. Though she suspected she knew, Christopher stood carefully, keeping Hope steady against his chest as he moved to sit on the edge of Sarai's bed. "I'm not asking because of Hope, or because of what people might say, or because of my family name. I'm asking because these past months have shown me what really matters, and what matters is you. Both of you." He shifted Hope gently to one arm, reaching into his pocket with his free hand. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." From his pocket he pulled a small velvet box. Opening it with one hand, he revealed a ring, not the ostentatious diamond Sarai might have expected from a Vale, but a simple band with a single pearl surrounded by tiny sapphires. "It reminded me of you," Christopher explained. "Not flashy, but luminous, unique, perfect." Sarai stared at the ring, then at Christopher's face. "Are you sure? Your father is not part of this decision," Christopher finished firmly. "This is about us, our family." He took a deep breath. "Sarai West, will you marry me? Not because you need my name or my money, not because of Hope, but because I love you, and I want to spend my life with you." Tears filled Sarai's eyes. All her life she'd been unwanted, by her birth parents, by foster families, by men who saw her as temporary. Now this man who could have anyone, who came from a world so different from hers, was choosing her. Not out of obligation, but out of love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Christopher's smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Hope stirred between them, making tiny, mewling sounds as she woke. Sarai reached for her, and Christopher carefully transferred their daughter to her arms. "Hello, sweet girl," Sarai cooed. "Did you hear that? Daddy and Mommy are getting married." Christopher wrapped his arm around them both, creating a circle of warmth and protection. In that moment, the outside world, with its judgments, its expectations, its complications, seemed very far away. Here in this hospital room was everything that mattered. "We should rest," Sarai said finally, noticing the dark circles under Christopher's eyes. "It's been a long day." Christopher nodded, settling back into the hospital chair beside her bed. "I'll stay right here." I know you will, Sarai said, and for the first time in her life, she truly believed someone would. Hours later, a nurse came in to check Sarai's vitals and found a scene that made her smile despite years of professional detachment. Sarai was asleep in the hospital bed, the baby tucked safely in the bassinet beside her, and in the chair Christopher Vale, whose name she recognized from news reports and society pages, was also asleep, one hand reaching across the space to rest on the bassinet, as if unwilling to break contact even in sleep. The nurse adjusted Sarai's blanket, checked the baby's position, and slipped out quietly, leaving the new family to their dreams. Outside the hospital, the world continued its noisy progress. Reporters would eventually discover the birth, though the Vale family PR team would manage to keep most details private. Harrison Vale would, in time, come to meet his granddaughter, his hard heart softening incrementally in the face of her innocent charm. But for now, in the quiet peace of the hospital room, none of that mattered. The only truth that mattered was the one Sarai had written in her journal, in the last entry before Hope's birth. My dearest daughter, your story begins with an accident, a mistake, a mix-up that most would call unfortunate. But as I feel you move within me, as I prepare to meet you, I know this truth. Sometimes life's greatest gifts come from its biggest mistakes. Your father and I didn't choose each other, but we've learned to love each other. And we both chose you from the moment we knew you existed. Whatever comes next, whatever challenges we face, whatever the world thinks of our unusual beginning, know this: you are loved, completely, unconditionally, eternally loved. And in the end, that's the only inheritance that truly matters. Hope Westvale would grow up knowing that truth. She would know that family isn't always about blood or names or legacies. Sometimes it's about choices made in hospital rooms, promises whispered to newborns, and love that builds bridges between worlds that were never meant to touch. Sometimes it's about the inheritance of the heart. As the doctor spoke, explaining the situation, Christopher felt as if the floor was tilting beneath him. A mix-up, his stored sample, a woman pregnant with his biological child. It was like something out of a bad movie. This is impossible, he said when she finished. There must be some mistake. We've run multiple tests to confirm, Dr. Reynolds said, her voice heavy with regret. I understand this is shocking, but shocking, Christopher's voice rose. This is beyond shocking. This is a complete violation. Who is this woman? What does she want? Her name is Sarai West. She works for us, actually, as a receptionist. And she hasn't asked for anything. She's as shocked as you are. Christopher ran a hand through his dark hair, his mind racing. I want a meeting, today, and I'm bringing my lawyer. Of course, Dr. Reynolds agreed. But Mr. Vale, please understand that Ms. West is also a victim here. But Christopher had already hung up, his finger already dialing his family's longtime attorney. 3 hours later, Sarai sat in the clinic's conference room, feeling small in the oversized chair. Across from her sat Christopher Vale, his expression cold and controlled, and beside him an older man in an expensive suit who had introduced himself as Mr. Harrington, the Vale family attorney. Let's be clear about what happened, Mr. Harrington was saying. The clinic made a grave error, one that has profound implications for my client. Sarai looked at Christopher, really seeing him for the first time. He was handsome in a polished way, with sharp features and eyes the color of steel. Everything about him, from his tailored suit to his expressionless face, screamed money and power. He was looking at her too, she realized, studying her with a gaze that felt like it was taking inventory. What do you want? Christopher asked suddenly, cutting off his lawyer mid-sentence. Excuse me? Sarai's voice was soft but steady. Money, is that it? How much will it take to handle this situation? His tone was businesslike, as if they were negotiating a contract. Something inside Sarai snapped. All her life she'd been seen as disposable, someone whose feelings didn't matter. In the foster system, in relationships, and now here, in what might be the most vulnerable moment of her life. I don't want your money, Mr. Vale, she said, sitting up straighter. What I want is to be treated like a human being. What I want is to figure out what to do about a situation that neither of us asked for. Christopher seemed taken aback by her response. He'd clearly expected demands, tears, or manipulation, not this quiet dignity. The clinic has offered to cover all. Medical expenses, she continued. I'm not looking for anything from you. I just thought you had a right to know. A right to know, Christopher repeated, his voice rising slightly. This is my biological child we're talking about. I have more than just a right to know. Christopher, his lawyer cautioned, but he waved him off. What are your intentions? Christopher demanded. Because I need to be very clear. The Vale family does not do scandals. We do not do public spectacles. And we do not allow our name to be dragged through tabloid headlines. Sarai felt heat rising to her cheeks. Your name? Is that what you're worried about? Your precious family name? You don't understand. No, I don't, Sarai agreed, standing up. I don't understand what it's like to have a family name to protect. I aged out of foster care at 18, with nothing but a trash bag full of clothes and a high school diploma. I've worked for everything I have, so no, I don't understand your world, Mr. Vale. The room fell silent. Christopher stared at her, something shifting in his expression. I think we all need some time to process this, Dr. Reynolds said, stepping in. This is a lot to take in for everyone. Sarai nodded, suddenly exhausted. I have to get back to work. You're still working here? After what they did to you? Christopher asked, sounding genuinely surprised. I need the job, Sarai said simply. And the health insurance. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. I didn't ask for this either, Mr. Vale, but this baby exists now, and it's part of both of us. So we need to figure it out. With that, she left, her heart pounding. She made it to the employee bathroom before the tears came, hot and fast. What had she done? Standing up to Christopher Vale like that, a man who could probably buy and sell the entire clinic with his pocket change, a man who was now, through some cosmic joke, connected to her forever. Christopher watched her go, a strange feeling settling in his chest. He'd come here ready for a fight, accusations, demands, threats. But this woman, this Sarai West, had thrown him completely off balance with her quiet strength and lack of theatrics. We should discuss legal options, Mr. Harrington was saying. Parental rights, custody arrangements, confidentiality agreements. But Christopher was only half listening. He was thinking about the look in Sarai's eyes when she talked about aging out of foster care, about working for everything she had. It was a look he recognized, pride mixed with a deep-seated determination. He saw it in the mirror sometimes, on the days when he was fighting to prove himself as more than just a Vale heir. I want to know everything about her, he said suddenly. Background, finances, medical history, everything. Of course, Mr. Harrington nodded. We'll begin the investigation immediately. Not an investigation, Christopher corrected him. Information. I just need information. As he left the clinic, Christopher's phone rang. It was his father. Christopher. The older man's voice boomed through the speaker. I just had a very disturbing call from Harrington. What's this about a pregnancy? Some clinic worker claiming to be carrying a Vale heir. Christopher closed his eyes briefly. Of course, his lawyer had already called his father. The Vale family. Machine was nothing if not efficient. It's complicated, Dad. There was a mix-up at the clinic with my stored sample. A mix-up? His father repeated, his voice dangerous. Or an opportunity. Some gold digger who saw a chance to cash in on the Vale fortune? It's not like that, Christopher said, surprised at his own defense of Sarai. She seems different. They always do, son, his father said dismissively. Fix this, whatever it takes. The Vale name does not get dragged through scandal, not on my watch. The call ended, and Christopher stood on the sidewalk, feeling torn between worlds. His father's voice in one ear, Sarai's quiet dignity in the other. A child, his child, growing inside a woman he'd just met. A woman who wanted nothing from him, which somehow made him feel, what? Relieved, intrigued, suspicious. He didn't know. But as he got into his car, Christopher realized one thing. For the first time in a long time, he had no idea what came next, and that terrified him more than he wanted to admit. Back in her apartment that night, Sarai sat cross-legged on her bed, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. It's just you and me, little one, she whispered. And we're going to be okay, somehow. She thought about Christopher Vale's cold eyes, his immediate assumption that she wanted his money, the way his whole body seemed to radiate power and privilege. They were from different worlds, planets that never should have collided, but they had. And now, against all odds, they shared something that couldn't be undone. As Sarai drifted off to sleep, she had no idea that across town, in his luxury penthouse, Christopher Vale was staring at his phone, her name pulled up in a search engine. No idea that in the coming weeks, their lives would become even more entangled. No idea that this accidental connection would force both of them to confront everything they thought they knew about love, legacy, and what truly matters in life. The storm was just beginning. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur for Sarai. Morning sickness hit her hard, making her workdays at the clinic a special kind of torture. She had moved to the billing department away from the front desk at Dr. Reynolds' suggestion. It was better this way. Fewer curious eyes, fewer whispers. News of the mix-up had spread through the clinic staff like wildfire, despite management's attempts to keep it quiet. Sarai felt the stares, heard the conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Some colleagues were supportive, bringing her crackers for the nausea or offering rides home when she looked too tired for the bus. Others kept their distance, as if her situation might be contagious. "You should sue them for millions," her friend Tasha said over coffee. Well, Tasha had coffee. Sarai stuck to ginger tea. "This is a life-changing mistake." Sarai shook her head. "It's not about money, Tash. Girl, it's always about money when you're talking about a baby. Diapers, daycare, college." Tasha counted off on her fingers. "And this Vale guy, he's loaded, right? Why not make him pay?" "Because I don't want to be that person," Sarai said firmly. "I've spent my whole life being judged, put in boxes. Foster kid, charity case, black girl who must be after handouts. I won't give anyone the satisfaction." Tasha's expression softened. "I get it. But what's your plan then?" "Single motherhood isn't easy." That was the question Sarai had been asking herself every night as she lay awake, one hand on her stomach. What was her plan? Across town, Christopher Vale was asking himself the same question. He sat in his father's wood-paneled study, a room designed to intimidate with its dark furniture and walls of leather-bound books. Harrison Vale, at 65, was still an imposing figure, tall, distinguished, with the same steel-grey eyes as his son, but none of the uncertainty. "The solution is simple," Harrison was saying, swirling brandy in a crystal glass. "We offer the woman a generous settlement in exchange for termination and complete confidentiality." Christopher's jaw tightened. "She's made it clear she's keeping the baby, Dad." "Everyone has a price," Harrison dismissed. "Harrington says she's living in a one-bedroom apartment in a questionable neighborhood. No family support, minimal savings. Trust me, she'll see reason." "You don't know her," Christopher said, surprised at his own defensiveness. In truth, he didn't know Sarai either. Not really. Just the facts from the background check. Raised in foster care after her mother died of an overdose when she was 5. Father unknown. Decent student. No criminal record. Worked consistently since high school. Currently taking online courses in healthcare management. On paper, an ordinary life. But the woman he'd met in that conference room, with her quiet dignity and unflinching gaze, had been anything but ordinary. "I know her type," Harrison countered. "And I know what's at stake here." "The Vale name isn't the only thing that matters," Christopher interrupted. "This is my child we're talking about." Harrison set down his glass with a sharp click. "A child conceived through a medical error, with a woman you don't know from a background that has nothing in common with ours. Think about what you're saying, Christopher." "I am thinking." Christopher stood. "I'm thinking that I need to handle this my way." His father's laugh was cold. "Your way? When have you ever done anything your way? You went to the schools I chose, joined the business I built, dated the women I approved of. Even that sperm deposit was my idea. Don't pretend you've suddenly developed a backbone." The words hit their mark. Christopher felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the feeling that had followed him since childhood, the constant knowledge that he was a disappointment to the man whose approval he desperately wanted. "This time is different," he said quietly. "I'm going to meet with her again alone." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Be careful, son. Women like that see men like you as meal tickets. Remember what happened with Eliza's nanny." Christopher winced at the memory. His sister's former nanny had tried to sue the family, claiming Harrison had made inappropriate advances. The case had been settled quietly, the woman paid off and sent away with an ironclad NDA. Christopher had never known the truth of the accusations, but the incident had taught him what his father was capable of to protect the family name. "Sarai West isn't like that," he said, though he had no real basis for the claim. "For your sake, I hope you're right," Harrison replied. "But I'll have Harrington prepare the paperwork anyway, just in case." 2 days later, Christopher found himself sitting in a small cafe near Sarai's workplace, nervously checking his watch. He'd called the clinic, asked to speak with her directly. To his surprise, she had agreed to meet him. The bell above the door jingled, and there she was. Dressed simply in black pants and a light blue blouse, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. No makeup, no jewelry except small silver hoops in her ears. She scanned the cafe, spotted him, and walked over with measured steps. "Mr. Vale," she said, sitting across from him. "Christopher, please," he replied. "Thank you for meeting me." A waitress appeared, and Sarai ordered herbal tea. Christopher realized his coffee had gone cold. "How are you feeling?" he asked when they were alone again. "Nauseous. Tired. The usual, I guess." She wrapped her hands around the mug when it arrived, as if seeking its warmth. "I want to apologize," Christopher said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. The Vales rarely apologized. "For anything. For how I acted at our first meeting. I was shocked and I didn't handle it well." Sarai's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "It was a shock for both of us. I've been thinking about what comes next," he continued. "And I want you to know that I'm prepared to take responsibility. Financially, I mean. For medical expenses, and after the baby is born." "I told you I don't want your money," Sarai interrupted. "It's not about what you want," Christopher said, then winced at how that sounded. "I mean, it's not about charity. It's about my obligation to my child." Sarai studied him for a long moment. "What exactly are you proposing?" Christopher took a deep breath. "I want to be involved. In the pregnancy, in the baby's life. I want joint custody." The color drained from Sarai's face. "Joint custody? You don't even know me." "I know, and that's why I'm suggesting we get to know each other. For the baby's sake. And if I refuse?" Christopher hesitated. His father's words echoed in his mind. The Vale name, the family legacy. "I hope it won't come to that. My family has significant resources, Sarai. Legal battles can be unpleasant, as..." Soon as the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Sarai's expression hardened, and she set down her mug with deliberate care. "Is that a threat, Mr. Vale?" "No, it's because it sounds like one." She stood, gathering her purse. "I thought you wanted to talk like reasonable adults. But you're just like everyone else who's had power over me, foster parents, social workers, bosses, thinking you can control my life because you have money and I don't." "That's not what I meant." Christopher stood too, aware of people turning to look at them. "Please, sit down. Let's start over." But Sarai was already walking away. At the door, she turned back. "I have an ultrasound next Tuesday, 2 o'clock, Atlanta Women's Care. If you want to see your child, be there. If not, have your lawyer call mine." And then she was gone, leaving Christopher standing alone, feeling like he'd failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. Tuesday came, and Sarai sat in the waiting room, trying not to watch the door. It was 1:55 p.m. She'd been there since 1:30, too nervous to sit at home any longer. At exactly 2, the door opened and Christopher walked in. He was wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt, the most casual she'd seen him. He looked around, spotted her, and walked over. "You came," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "I said I would." He sat beside her, leaving an empty chair between them. "I meant what I said about wanting to be involved." Before Sarai could respond, a nurse called her name. She stood, and after a moment's hesitation, Christopher followed. In the examination room, Sarai lay on the table, her shirt raised to expose her still flat stomach. Christopher stood awkwardly by the wall, hands in his pockets, looking everywhere but at her. Dr. Martinez entered, her eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of Christopher. "Well, hello there. I'm Dr. Martinez." "Christopher Vale," he said, extending his hand. I'm the, Father, Sarai supplied. He's the father. The word hung in the air between them. It was the first time either had said it out loud. Dr. Martinez squeezed gel onto Sarai's stomach. Let's see how this little one is doing, shall we? The room filled, with a rapid whooshing sound. That's the heartbeat, Dr. Martinez explained, moving the wand across Sarai's abdomen. Strong and regular. Perfect. Christopher moved closer, drawn by the sound. When the grainy image appeared on the screen, his breath caught. Is that your baby? Dr. Martinez confirmed. About 8 weeks along. See that flicker? That's the heart. Sarai stared at the screen, a lump forming in her throat. Until this moment, the pregnancy had felt abstract. Something happening to her body, but not quite real. Now seeing that tiny form, hearing that galloping heartbeat, it all became suddenly overwhelmingly concrete. She turned to look at Christopher and was startled by what she saw. His face, usually so controlled, was open with wonder. His eyes glistened with what might have been tears. Would you like a picture to take home? Dr. Martinez asked. Yes, they said in unison, then looked at each other in surprise. After the appointment, they walked together to the parking lot in awkward silence. That was, Christopher began. Amazing, Sarai finished. He nodded. I didn't expect to feel so. I know. For the first time, they shared a genuine smile. Christopher cleared his throat. Would you have dinner with me? Not today, necessarily, but soon. There's a lot we should talk about. Sarai hesitated. Everything in her experience told her to be cautious, to keep her walls up. But she was carrying this man's child. They were connected now, whether she liked it or not. Okay, she agreed. But somewhere casual. I'm not exactly dressed for fine. Dining these days. I know a place, Christopher said, pulling out his phone. Can I have your number to set it up? As Sarai recited her number, she wondered if she was making a mistake. But the memory of Christopher's face when he saw the ultrasound gave her a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way through this maze together. 3 days. Later, Sarai found herself sitting across from Christopher at a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. The place was cozy and unpretentious. Checkered tablecloths, candles in wine bottles, the scent of garlic and tomato sauce in the air. How did you find this place? She asked, looking around. It doesn't seem very Vale-like. Christopher laughed, softly. I came to college in Atlanta. Before I moved back into my family's world, I had a life of my own. This was my favorite spot. Sarai studied him over her menu. Tell me about your family. All I know is what I've read online, and that's mostly about your father's company and your charity galas. Christopher's expression tightened slightly. The Vale family is complicated. My father built Vale Industries from a small manufacturing company into a conglomerate. He has very specific ideas about legacy and reputation. My mother manages the social aspects, charity work, community standing. And my sister Eliza married well and produced the first Vale grandchild right on schedule. And you, Sarai asked, where do you fit in? I'm the disappointment, Christopher said with a wry smile. I started my own tech company instead of joining the family business. I refused to marry any of the suitable women my mother parades in front of me, and now I've managed to create a Vale heir with someone outside our social circle. The way he said it, matter-of-factly, without judgment, made Sarai relax slightly. Your family doesn't sound very warm. They're not, Christopher agreed. But they're family. What about yours? Sarai tensed. I told you. I aged out of foster care. I don't have family. No one? Christopher pressed gently. No foster parents you stayed in touch with? No friends who became like family? The question caught her off guard. Most people didn't ask follow-up questions when she mentioned foster care. They either changed the subject or offered pitying looks. There was one family, she admitted. The Johnsons. I lived with them from 14 to 17. They were good people. But they had their own kids, and once I aged out, life happened. We lost touch. I'm sorry, Christopher said, and he seemed to mean it. Their food arrived. Spaghetti carbonara. For her, lasagna for him. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. So, Sarai said finally, we should probably talk about the elephant in the room. What happens when this baby comes? Christopher set down his fork. I want to be involved. I want joint custody. But I also want to make this as easy as possible for you. Easy how? I can provide an apartment in a better neighborhood. Healthcare, childcare, anything you need. Sarai's guard went up immediately. I don't need your charity. It's not charity, Christopher insisted. It's providing for my child and for the mother of my child. The phrase hung between them. Mother of my child, so clinical, so impersonal, yet undeniably true. I have a job, Sarai said firmly. I have healthcare. My apartment is small, but it's clean and safe. But you'll need more space for a baby, Christopher pointed out. And what about when you go back to work? Childcare is expensive. I'll figure it out, Sarai said, though the practical part of her brain was already calculating costs, weighing options. I always do. Christopher studied her face. Why is it so hard for you to accept help? The question hit close to home. Too close. Because help always comes with strings attached, Sarai said quietly. And I've spent my whole life trying to cut those strings. Christopher was silent for a moment. What if I promise no strings? What if we put everything in writing? A legal agreement that protects your independence while ensuring the baby has everything it needs. Sarai thought about it. She thought about her tiny apartment, her tight budget, the online courses she'd have to put on hold once the baby came. She thought about doing it all alone, as she'd done everything else in her life. I'll think about it, she said finally. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small crack in the wall she'd built around herself. As the weeks passed, Sarai and Christopher fell into an uneasy routine. Weekly dinners to discuss the pregnancy and plans for the baby. Doctor's appointments where Christopher would appear, always on time, always with questions prepared. Text messages about prenatal vitamins and baby name books. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension between them began to ease. Sarai found herself looking forward to their dinners, to Christopher's dry sense of humor and his genuine interest in her day. Christopher found himself thinking about Sarai at odd moments, wondering if she was feeling well, if she'd liked the pregnancy tea he'd sent, if she was still having trouble sleeping. Neither of them noticed the shift happening. But others did. You look different, Tasha commented one day as they ate lunch in the clinic's break room. Happier, Sarai shrugged. It's probably just pregnancy hormones. Tasha said skeptically. And it has nothing to do with your baby daddy taking you out to dinner every week. It's not like that, Sarai protested. We're just trying to figure things out for the baby's sake. If you say so, Tasha grinned. But girl, I've seen the way he looks at you when he picks you up. That man is interested in more than co-parenting. Sarai dismissed the idea, but later, as she got ready for their dinner, she found herself taking extra care with her appearance. Her baby bump was visible now, a small but definite curve beneath her dress. She rubbed cocoa butter on her stomach, wondering what Christopher would think when he saw it. Across town, Christopher was having a similar conversation with his sister. You're actually humming, Eliza said, eyebrows raised as she sat in his office. I don't think I've ever heard you hum. Christopher stopped abruptly. I wasn't humming. You absolutely were, Eliza laughed. What's her name again, Sarah? Sarai, Christopher corrected. And it's not like that. We're just trying to be civil for the baby's sake. Right, Eliza nodded. That's why you've suddenly become an expert. On prenatal nutrition and why there's a stack of baby books on your desk. Christopher glanced at the books self-consciously. I like to be prepared. Eliza echoed Tasha's skepticism from across town. Just be careful, Chris. Dad is watching this situation very closely. He's not happy about it. Christopher's mood darkened. Dad is never happy about anything I do. You know what I mean, Eliza said gently. This is a delicate situation. A veil air with someone outside our circle. It's unprecedented. Times change, Christopher said firmly. And anyway, Sarai she's different. Different how? Christopher struggled to put it into words. She's real, genuine. She doesn't want anything from me except respect. Do you know how rare that is in our world? Eliza studied her brother's face. Oh my God, you're falling for her. Don't be ridiculous, Christopher scoffed, but his cheeks colored slightly. I barely know her. But you want to, Eliza pressed. Admit it. Christopher checked his watch. I have to go, dinner reservation. Eliza's laughter followed him out the door along with a warning. Just remember, Christopher, Dad always gets his way in the end. The warning echoed in Christopher's mind as he drove to pick up Sarai. His father had been suspiciously quiet lately. No more demands for settlements or confidentiality agreements. No more rants about the Vale name and legacy. It wasn't like Harrison to give up so easily. When Christopher arrived at Sarai's apartment building, she was waiting outside, a light cardigan draped over her simple blue dress. The sight of her made his heart do something strange in his chest. You look nice, he said, as she got into the car. Thanks, she replied, smoothing her dress over her small bump. It's one of the few things that still fits. Christopher's eyes went to her stomach. It's really showing now. Yeah, Sarai said, a hint of wonder in her voice. I felt it move. Yesterday? Just a flutter, but definitely movement. Really? Christopher's face lit up. What did it feel like? As Sarai described the sensation, Christopher found himself wishing he could feel it too. The thought surprised him. A month ago, this pregnancy had been a problem to solve, a situation to manage. Now it was becoming something else, something real and precious. They arrived at the restaurant, one they'd been to before. The host knew, them now greeting them by name and leading them to their table in the corner. So, Sarai said once they were seated, I've been thinking about your offer. The apartment, the support. Christopher leaned forward, surprised. And? I'm still not comfortable with you buying me an apartment, she said, but I'm willing to discuss arrangements, for the baby's sake. It was a small concession, but Christopher recognized it for what it was, a monumental step for someone as fiercely independent as Sarai. Thank you, he said simply. We can take it slow, figure out what works for both of us. Sarai nodded, relief evident in her face. I'd like that. As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily than ever before. They discussed baby names. Nothing. Decided, but they both liked traditional names. Nursery themes, Sarai was thinking stars and moons, and the upcoming anatomy scan where they might learn the baby's sex. Do you want to know, Christopher asked, if it's a boy or girl? Sarai thought about it. I think so, it makes it more real somehow. What about you? Definitely, Christopher nodded. I like to be prepared, Sarai laughed. I've noticed. The sound of her laughter did something to Christopher, something warm and dangerous. He wanted to hear it again, to be the cause of it. After dinner, as they walked back to his car, Sarai suddenly stopped, her hand going to her stomach. What is it? Christopher asked, alarmed. Are you okay? Sarai smiled. It's moving again, here. Without thinking, she took his hand and placed it on her bump. Christopher stood frozen, his hand on the curve of her stomach, his eyes locked with hers. For a moment, the world around them disappeared. No Vale legacy, no complicated past, no uncertain future. Just the two of them and the tiny life they'd created. I don't feel anything, he whispered. It's probably too early for you to feel it from the outside, Sarai admitted. But it's there. Trust me. Trust me. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Trust was not something either of them gave easily. The moment was broken by the buzz of Christopher's phone. He reluctantly removed his hand from Sarai's stomach and checked the screen. His father's name flashed up at him. I should take this, he said apologetically. Sarai nodded, stepping back, the walls coming up again. Of course. Christopher walked a few steps away. Hello, Dad. We need to talk, Harrison's voice was clipped. About this situation with the West woman. It's gone on long enough. I'm handling it, Christopher said, his jaw tightening. No, you're not, Harrison replied. You're getting emotionally involved. That's dangerous, Christopher. Remember who you are. Remember what's at stake. I have to go, Christopher said. We'll talk tomorrow. He hung up before his father could respond, turning back to Sarai. But the easy connection of moments ago had vanished. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression guarded again. Everything okay? She asked. Fine, Christopher lied. Just work stuff. As he drove her home, the silence between them felt heavier than before. At her building, he walked her to the door, unsure what to say. "Thank you for dinner," Sarai said formally. "Sarai, Christopher began, then stopped. What could he say? That he was beginning to feel something for her? That he was terrified of those feelings? That his father would do everything in his power to keep them apart? "Good night, Christopher," Sarai said softly, disappearing inside. Christopher stood there for a long moment, feeling like he was being pulled in two directions. The Vale heir, with all the expectations and responsibilities that came with the name, and just Christopher, the man who had felt a baby move tonight and looked into a woman's eyes and seen a future he'd never imagined. As he drove home, his father's words echoed in his mind. "Remember who you are. Remember what's at stake." The problem was, for the first time in his life, Christopher wasn't sure he wanted to be a Vale anymore, and that terrified him more than anything. The morning sickness had finally passed. But Sarai's relief was short-lived. At 16 weeks pregnant, she faced a new challenge. Her clothes no longer fit. Standing in front of her small closet, she sighed at the limited options. She had a doctor's appointment today, the anatomy scan where they might learn the baby's sex, and Christopher would be there. For some reason, that made her want to look nice. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Christopher, need a ride to the appointment?" Sarai hesitated. Usually they met at the clinic, but her car was making a strange noise, and the bus would take forever. "That would be great," she texted back, "and thanks." 20 minutes later, she was waiting outside her building when Christopher's sleek black Audi pulled up. He got out to open the door for her, a gesture that still felt strange. In her world, men didn't open doors. "You look nice," he said as she got in. Sarai glanced down at her stretchy black dress, the only thing that still fit comfortably. "Thanks. It's getting harder to find things to wear." "Have you gone shopping for maternity clothes?" Christopher asked, pulling into traffic. "Not yet. I'm waiting for my next paycheck." Christopher frowned slightly but said nothing. They'd had this conversation before, his offers of financial help, her firm refusals. It had become a dance between them, 1 step forward, 2 steps. Back at the clinic, they sat side by side in the waiting room. Sarai noticed Christopher seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just work stuff," he said, but his tight expression suggested otherwise. Before she could press further, a nurse called her name. In the exam room, Sarai lay on the table, her rounded belly exposed. Christopher stood nearby, his posture stiff. "Doctor." Martinez entered with a smile. "Ready to see how this little one is growing?" The cold gel made Sarai flinch, but soon the familiar whooshing sound filled the room. The image on the screen was clearer now, unmistakably a baby. "Heart looks good," Dr. Martinez said, moving the wand. "Spine, brain development, all normal. Let's check those organs. Everything looks perfect." Sarai felt tears prick her eyes. After weeks of worry, about the baby's health, about her ability to be a mother, about the complicated situation with Christopher, the sight of her healthy child brought overwhelming relief. "Would you like to know the sex?" Dr. Martinez asked. Sarai glanced at Christopher, who had moved closer, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Yes," they said in unison. Dr. Martinez smiled. "It's a girl, congratulations." "A girl," Sarai whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. She turned to look at Christopher and was startled by his expression. His eyes were wet, his face full of wonder and something else, fear. "A daughter," he said softly, as if testing the word. Later, as they walked to his car, Christopher seemed lost in thought. "Are you disappointed?" Sarai asked. "That it's not a boy?" Christopher looked surprised by the question. "No, not at all. Why would you think that?" Sarai shrugged. "Some men want sons, especially men from families like yours, to carry on the name and all that." Christopher was quiet for a moment. "My father probably would prefer a boy, but he hesitated. "I think a daughter sounds perfect." Something in his voice made Sarai's heart beat faster. "Well, she's healthy. That's what matters." "Yes," Christopher agreed. Then, tentatively, "Have you thought about names?" They discussed possibilities on the drive back to Sarai's apartment. Charlotte, too fancy, Sarai thought. Maya, too common, according to Christopher. Elizabeth, a family name on the Vale side. Zora, Sarai's favorite author. The conversation was so normal, so domestic, that for a moment Sarai could almost forget the strange circumstances that had brought them together. Almost. At her building, Christopher turned off the engine but made no move to get out. "Sarai, there's something I should tell you." His serious tone made her stomach clench with anxiety. "What is it?" "My father wants to meet you. He's invited us to dinner this weekend at the family estate." Sarai felt her defenses rise immediately. "Why now? It's been months and he's shown no interest in me or the baby." Christopher sighed. "That's not entirely true. He's been monitoring the situation. And now that we know it's a girl," he trailed off, "what difference does that make?" "In my father's world, a lot," Christopher admitted. "A boy would be the Vale heir, straightforward. A girl is, well, it changes how he'll approach things." Sarai crossed her arms. "Approach what things exactly?" "How the baby fits into the family, how you fit in." Christopher ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarai had come to recognize as a sign of stress. "I know it's a lot to ask. My family can be overwhelming. But I think it's better to do this on our terms than have him show up unannounced." Sarai thought about it. Meeting Christopher's family had always been inevitable, she supposed, but the thought filled her with dread. "Will your mother be there? Your sister?" "Yes," Christopher nodded. "The whole family. I'll be right beside you the entire time, I promise." Against her better judgment, Sarai agreed. "What should I wear?" Christopher looked relieved. "Don't worry about that, just be yourself." It was the wrong thing to say. Be myself? At a dinner with one of Atlanta's wealthiest families? In my target. Maternity clothes? Christopher winced. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," Sarai said, softening slightly. "But this is a big deal for me, Christopher. I don't want to embarrass you." "You could never embarrass me," he said so earnestly that Sarai almost believed him. Almost Saturday evening arrived, and Sarai stood in front of her mirror, trying not to panic. After much deliberation, she'd spent a significant portion of her savings on a simple but elegant navy blue maternity dress. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she'd applied minimal makeup. She looked presentable, she decided. Not Vale-worthy, perhaps, but the best she could do. Her phone buzzed. Christopher was outside. The drive to the Vale estate took them through Atlanta's most exclusive neighborhood, past mansions set back from the road behind wrought iron gates. Christopher was quiet, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Nervous?" Sarai asked, trying to lighten the mood. "Terrified," Christopher admitted, surprising her with his honesty. "My family can be difficult." "We don't have to do this," Sarai offered, almost hoping he'd turn the car around. But Christopher shook his head. "Yes, we do. Better to face them head-on." They turned onto a private drive lined with ancient oak trees. At the end stood a columned mansion that looked like something out of Gone with the Wind. Sarai's mouth went dry. "You grew up here?" she asked, unable to keep the awe from her voice. "Unfortunately," Christopher said, his tone bitter, "it's not as warm as it looks." He parked in front of the house, came around to open her door, and offered his hand to help her out. To her surprise, he didn't let go once she was standing. Instead, he laced his fingers through hers. "Remember," he said quietly, "whatever happens in there, we're in this together." The gesture gave Sarai courage. Together, they walked up the grand steps to the front door, which opened before they could knock. A middle-aged man, in what appeared to be a uniform, greeted them. "Mr. Christopher," he said with a slight bow, "your family is waiting in the parlor." Inside, the house was even more impressive. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably cost more than Sarai would earn in a lifetime. She felt Christopher's hand tighten around hers as they were led through the grand foyer. The parlor turned out to be a formal sitting room with antique furniture and a roaring fireplace despite the mild spring evening. 3 people stood as they entered. An older man with Christopher's steel-grey eyes, a thin woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair, and a younger woman who bore a striking resemblance to Christopher. "Christopher," the older man said, his voice as cold as his eyes. "At last." "Father," Christopher nodded. "Mother, Eliza, this is Sarai West." Sarai straightened her shoulders, suddenly grateful for Christopher's warm hand in hers. "It's nice to meet you all." Harrison Vale made no move to shake her hand. He merely looked her up and down, his expression impossible to read. Christopher's mother, Vivian, offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss West," she said, her voice dripping with southern gentility. "What an unusual name." "It's Hebrew," Sarai explained. "From the Bible." "How interesting," Vivian replied, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. Only Eliza, Christopher's sister, seemed genuinely welcoming. She stepped forward with a warm smile. "I'm so glad to finally meet you, Sarai. Chris has told me so much about you." Before Sarai could respond, Harrison cleared his throat. "Shall we move to the dining room? Cook has prepared dinner." The dining room was something out of a period drama. A long mahogany table that could seat 20, crystal glasses, silver candlesticks, and fine china. Sarai was seated between Christopher and Eliza, directly across from Vivian. Harrison took his place at the head of the table. As the first course was served, a soup Sarai didn't recognize, Harrison fixed his cold gaze on her. "So, Miss West, Christopher tells me you work at the clinic where this mistake occurred." Sarai felt Christopher tense beside her. "Yes, Mr. Vale, I'm in the billing department now." "And before that?" "I was a receptionist." Harrison exchanged a look with his wife. "And your family, what do they do?" Sarai took a small sip of water, buying time. "I don't have family, Mr. Vale. I grew up in foster care." A heavy silence fell over the table. Vivian looked as if someone had mentioned a particularly unpleasant bodily function. "I see," Harrison said finally. "And your education?" "Dad," Christopher warned, "this isn't a job interview." "I'm merely trying to get to know the mother of my grandchild," Harrison replied smoothly. "Is that so wrong?" "I have my high school diploma," Sarai answered, determined not to be intimidated, "and I'm taking online courses in healthcare management, or I was, before the pregnancy." Harrison nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "And now you find yourself in quite fortunate circumstances, don't you? Carrying a Vale child." Sarai felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I wouldn't call an unwanted medical procedure fortunate, Mr. Vale." "Perhaps not," Harrison conceded, "but the outcome could be quite beneficial for someone in your position." "Dad, that's enough," Christopher said, his voice sharp. Harrison ignored him. "I'll be direct, Miss West. What are your expectations from this situation?" Sarai met his gaze steadily. "My expectation is to have a healthy baby and provide her with a loving home, that's all." "Admirable," Harrison said, his tone suggesting he didn't believe her for a second. "And your financial expectations?" "From my son, from the Vale family." "I don't want your money, Mr. Vale," Sarai said firmly. Harrison laughed, a sound without humor. "Everyone wants money, Miss West, especially those who have none." "Father," Christopher's voice was tight with anger. "That's enough." "It's all right," Sarai said, placing a calming hand on Christopher's arm. "Mr. Vale, I understand your skepticism. In your world, people probably do things for money all the time. But I'm not from your world. I've taken care of myself since I was 18 years old. I've never asked for handouts, and I don't intend to start now." The table fell silent again. Vivian looked shocked, Eliza impressed, and Harrison calculating. "Well said," Harrison replied after a moment. "But noble speeches aside, there are practical matters to discuss. The Vale name, for instance. Will the child have it?" Sarai glanced at Christopher, unsure how to answer. They hadn't discussed this yet. "Yes," Christopher said firmly. "She will be a Vale." Harrison nodded. "And the living arrangements? Surely you don't expect my granddaughter to be raised in some apartment?" Before either Sarai or Christopher could respond, the butler appeared at Harrison's side and whispered something in his ear. Harrison's expression darkened. "Send them away," he ordered. "No comment." "What is it?" Vivian asked. Harrison's jaw tightened. "Reporters. At the gate." Sarai felt a chill run down her spine. "Reporters? Why would reporters be here?" "That's what I'd like to know," Harrison said, his gaze accusing as it shifted between Sarai and Christopher. "I didn't tell anyone about dinner tonight," Christopher said, looking confused. "Did you?" he asked Sarai. Of course not, Sarai replied, offended by the implication. Eliza cleared her throat. Actually, it might be my fault. I mentioned to Madison that we were meeting Chris's girlfriend tonight. She's not my girlfriend, Christopher said automatically, then winced as he saw Sarai's hurt expression. I mean, we haven't… Madison Hollingsworth is the biggest gossip in Atlanta society, Vivian hissed at her daughter. What were you thinking, Eliza? I didn't think it was a secret. Eliza defended herself. And I didn't say anything about the baby. It doesn't matter, Harrison cut in. The damage is done. If they're at the gate, they already know. He turned to Sarai, his expression hard. Did you tell anyone at the clinic about tonight? About your relationship with my son? It's not a secret that Christopher is the father, Sarai said carefully. The clinic staff knows, of course. And you discussed our family dinner with them, Harrison pressed. I mentioned I was nervous about meeting Christopher's family, Sarai admitted. But I didn't think… No, you didn't think, Harrison interrupted. This is exactly what I was afraid of. The Vale name dragged through gossip. Dad, this isn't Sarai's fault, Christopher defended her. It doesn't matter whose fault it is, Harrison said. What matters is how we handle it. The story will break tomorrow, no doubt. Vale heir impregnates clinic worker in medical mix-up. Can you imagine the headlines? Sarai felt sick. She hadn't considered that their situation might become public. Knowledge, fodder for gossip columns and society pages. We need to get ahead of this, Harrison continued, already in damage control mode. Issue a statement, something that controls the narrative. What kind of statement? Christopher asked. Warily, Harrison thought for a moment. We announce your engagement. What? Sarai and Christopher exclaimed in unison. It's the perfect solution, Harrison continued, warming to his idea. We say you two met at the clinic, fell in love, and are now expecting a child together. A standard love story. The medical mix-up stays private. But that's a lie, Sarai said. Harrison waved a dismissive hand. A harmless one. Better than the truth, which makes the clinic look incompetent and our family look foolish. I won't do it, Sarai said firmly. I won't start my daughter's life with a lie. Don't be naive, Harrison scoffed. You think she'll thank you for the truth? That her conception was a mistake? That her parents were strangers? Dad, stop, Christopher warned. But Harrison was on a roll. This is bigger than your principles, Miss West. This is about protecting a child from unnecessary scandal. Unless, his eyes narrowed, you want the scandal. Perhaps you see it as leverage. The more public, the more pressure on Christopher to provide for you. Sarai stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. I think I've heard enough. Thank you for dinner, but I'd like to leave now. Sarai, wait. Christopher stood too, reaching for her hand. Are you coming? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Christopher looked torn, glancing between her and his father. Let me talk to them, make them understand. But Sarai had seen enough. The hesitation in Christopher's eyes told her everything she needed to know. When pushed, he chose his family, just as she'd always suspected he would. I'll call a cab, she said, pulling her hand away. Don't be ridiculous, Eliza jumped up. I'll drive you. Eliza, sit down, Vivian ordered. No, Mother, Eliza replied, surprising everyone. I'm taking Sarai home. And then Christopher and I are going to have a long talk about family loyalty. She gave her brother a pointed look. The right kind of family loyalty. Christopher looked ashamed, but still he hesitated. Sarai, please, it's fine, Sarai said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. I always knew where I stood. At least now it's clear. She followed Eliza out of the dining room, ignoring Vivian's gasp of outrage and Harrison's cold stare. In the grand foyer, the butler helped her with her coat, his expression carefully neutral. The ride back to her apartment was quiet at first. Eliza drove a sleek red convertible, the engine purring as they sped away from the Vale estate. I'm sorry. About my parents, Eliza said finally. They're from a different time. They're protective of their son, Sarai replied, staring out the window. I understand that. No, they're protective of the Vale name, Eliza corrected. There's a difference. And Christopher, he spent his whole life trying to please them, especially our father. Sarai thought about the man she'd come to know over the past few months. confident in business, uncertain in emotion, caught between worlds. He'll never choose me over them, will he? Eliza was quiet for a moment. I don't know. He's never stood up to our father before, but he's never had a reason like this. She glanced at Sarai's rounded belly. He cares about you, you know, more than he's willing to admit, even to himself. Sarai didn't respond. She was tired of hoping, tired of letting down her guard, only to be reminded of the vast differences between her world and Christopher's. At her building, Eliza insisted on walking her to the door. Will you be okay? Sarai nodded. I've been through worse. He'll come around, Eliza said, surprising Sarai with a quick hug. Just give him time. But as Sarai let herself into her empty apartment, she wondered if time was what they needed, or if some gaps were simply too wide to bridge. The next morning, Sarai woke to her phone buzzing incessantly. Texts from Tasha, from Dr. Reynolds, even from the clinic's lawyer, Miss Patel, all with the same message: call me. With a sense of dread, Sarai opened her web browser and searched for Vale family. The first headline made her heart sink. Vale, hair expecting child with clinic employee after medical error. The article beneath was worse, filled with half-truths and speculation about her relationship with Christopher, about the clinic's negligence, about the Vale family's reaction. There was even a photo of her, clearly taken without her knowledge, showing her and Christopher leaving a doctor's appointment. As she scrolled through more articles, each more sensational than the last, Sarai felt a cold fear settle in her stomach. This was exactly what she'd tried to avoid: public scrutiny, her private life laid bare for strangers to judge. Her phone rang. Christopher's name flashed on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, she answered. I'm so sorry, he said immediately. I had no idea this would happen. Your father predicted it, Sarai reminded him. He was right. I should have left with you last night, Christopher continued. I was an idiot. By the time Eliza came back and knocked some sense into me, you were already gone. I tried calling, but I turned my phone off, Sarai admitted. I needed space. I understand, Christopher said, though his voice suggested otherwise. But we need to talk about how to handle this. The press is calling my office, the clinic. They're probably going to find you, too. Sarai closed her eyes, imagining reporters outside her building, following her to work, documenting her every move. What does your father suggest? She asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Christopher was quiet for a moment. I don't care what he suggests. This is between you and me, our baby, our decision. The words surprised her. What are you saying? I'm saying I choose you, Christopher replied, his voice firm. Both of you. I was a coward last night, and I'm sorry, but I won't make that mistake again. Sarai's heart beat faster. Christopher, can I come over? He interrupted. Please, I need to see you. Against her better judgment, Sarai agreed. 30 minutes later, Christopher was at her door, looking like he hadn't slept. His normally perfect hair was disheveled, his eyes shadowed. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms. The hug was unexpected, but Sarai found herself returning it, her face pressed against his chest, inhaling his familiar scent. For a moment they stood there, holding each other in her tiny entryway. I'm sorry, Christopher said again when they finally pulled apart. For last night, for the media circus, for all of it. Sarai led him to her small living room, where they sat on her worn sofa. What happened after I left? Christopher ran a hand through his hair. I argued with my father. For the first time in my life, I really stood up to him. I told him I wouldn't lie about our relationship, and I wouldn't let him control how we handled this situation. How did he take that? Sarai asked, already guessing the answer. Not well, Christopher admitted. He threatened to cut me off, remove me from the family trust, the usual tactics. But I realized something last night watching you walk away. None of that matters if I lose you and our daughter. The words hung between them, full of meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. So what do we do now? Sarai asked, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Christopher took a deep breath. We face it together. No lies, no hiding. We tell our story, our way. Not my father's version, not the media's version. Ours. Sarai studied his face, looking for signs of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she nodded slowly. Okay, together. The relief in Christopher's eyes was palpable. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. There's something else I need to tell you. What is it? I've been looking at houses, he said. Not because I think your apartment isn't good enough, he added quickly, but because I want our daughter to have a home where both her parents can be comfortable, a middle ground between our worlds. Sarai's first instinct was to refuse, to insist she could provide for her child on her own. But she thought about her tiny apartment, the neighborhood that wasn't quite as safe as she pretended, the long hours she'd have to work to make ends meet. I'd want to contribute, she said finally. Pay what I can. Christopher nodded, understanding her need for independence. Whatever you're comfortable with. We can figure out the details later, but Sarai, he hesitated. I meant what I said. I choose you, both of you. No matter what my family thinks, no matter what the press says, I want us to be a family. The word family made Sarai's throat tight with emotion. Family was something she'd never really had, something she'd stopped hoping for long ago. I need time, she said honestly. This is all happening so fast. We have time, Christopher assured her. The baby's not due for months. We can take it slow, figure things out step by step. As if on cue, Sarai felt a strong kick. The baby, making her presence known. She gasped, placing her hand on the spot. What is it? Christopher asked, alarmed. She's kicking. Sarai smiled. Hard enough for you to feel it now. Here. She took his hand and placed it on her belly. Christopher's expression changed from concern to wonder as he felt the movement beneath his palm. That's incredible, he whispered. Hello there, little one. The tender moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Sarai frowned, not expecting anyone. Christopher stood. I'll get it. Before Sarai could stop him, he'd opened the door to reveal a man with a camera, who immediately began snapping photos. Christopher Vale, is it true you're having a baby with a clinic worker? Was it really a medical mix-up, or is there more to the story? Christopher slammed the door shut, his face pale with anger. I'm calling security, he said, pulling out his phone. But the damage was done. Within minutes, more reporters arrived, shouting questions through the door, some even peering through the windows, until Sarai drew the blinds. We need to get out of here, Christopher said, already dialing. I'm calling my driver. We can go. To my place. It has secure access. Sarai felt trapped, cornered in her own home. How did they find me so quickly? Someone at the clinic must have given them your address, Christopher said grimly. For a price. The thought made Sarai sick. People she'd worked with for years, selling her out for a quick buck. I can't live like this, she said, her voice shaking. I won't have my baby born into this circus. Christopher knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. Listen to me, this will pass, all scandals do, but until then let me protect you, both of you. Sarai looked into his eyes, the same steel grey as his father's, but filled with a warmth Harrison Vale would never understand. And despite all her reservations, all her fears, she found herself nodding. Okay, she agreed, but just until this dies down. Christopher's relieved smile made her heart flutter in a way she wasn't ready to examine too closely. Of course, just until it's safe. Neither of them knew then that until would stretch longer than they imagined. That the simple act of leaving Sarai's apartment together would provide the media with more fuel for their story. That Harrison Vale was already making calls, pulling strings, determined to control the narrative one way or another. As they hurried to Christopher's waiting car, shielding their faces from cameras, Sarai couldn't shake the feeling that she was crossing a threshold, leaving behind the safe, simple life she'd built for herself and stepping into something unknown and potentially dangerous. But then, Christopher's hand found hers steady and warm, and their daughter kicked again, strong and determined. And Sarai realized that sometimes the most dangerous step was also the most necessary one. Together they drove away from the crowd of reporters toward Christopher's world, a world Sarai had never imagined herself part of. A world that, for better or worse, would now be part of her daughter's legacy. The weeks that followed brought changes Sarai could never have predicted. Living in Christopher's penthouse apartment was like stepping into another dimension. Doormen who greeted her by name, a housekeeper who appeared silently to clean and cook, security guards who kept the press at bay. At first, she'd insisted on maintaining separate bedrooms, keeping a careful distance despite their forced proximity. But as days turned into weeks, the lines began to blur. Movie nights on Christopher's enormous sofa led to Sarai falling asleep against his shoulder. Breakfast conversations stretched into lunch. They developed routines, inside jokes, a comfortable rhythm. Christopher insisted she take a leave of absence from the clinic, partly for privacy, partly because the stress wasn't good for the baby. To her surprise, Sarai found herself agreeing. Her savings, combined with the clinic's continued salary, her gesture of goodwill or perhaps fear of lawsuit, meant she wasn't completely dependent on Christopher's generosity. The media attention gradually died down, as Christopher had predicted. There were still occasional paparazzi photos, still gossip column mentions, but the frenzy had subsided. What hadn't subsided was Harrison Vale's opposition. He called Christopher daily, alternating between threats and appeals to family loyalty. When those failed, he showed up at the penthouse unannounced one evening. Sarai was reading in the living room when the elevator doors opened, revealing Harrison's imposing figure. She stood quickly, one hand protectively on her 7-month belly. "Mr. Vale," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Christopher isn't home." "I know," Harrison replied, stepping into the apartment like he owned it, which, Sarai realized, he probably did. "I wanted to speak with you. Alone." Sarai's guard went up immediately. "About what?" Harrison looked around the penthouse, noting Sarai's books on the coffee table, her cardigan draped over a chair, the prenatal yoga mat rolled up in the corner. Signs of her presence, her integration into Christopher's life. "About the future," Harrison said finally. "Your future, my son's future, and my granddaughter's future." "I'm listening," Sarai said, sitting back down, partly because her ankles were swollen, partly to show she wasn't intimidated. Harrison remained standing, looking down at her. "I'll be direct, Miss West. This arrangement, playing house with my son, it can't last. You must know that." "Why not?" Sarai asked, though she'd asked herself the same question countless times. "Because you're from different worlds," Harrison said bluntly. "Christopher was raised to take over a billion-dollar corporation, to move in circles of influence and power. You were raised, well," he waved a dismissive hand. "The differences are too great. People overcome differences all the time," Sarai countered. Harrison's laugh was cold. "In fairy tales, perhaps. But this is reality. Eventually the novelty will wear off. Christopher will remember who he is, what his responsibilities are, and where will that leave you? A single mother with a child torn between two worlds." Sarai's hand tightened on her stomach, feeling her daughter kick as if in protest. "You don't know your son as well as you think you do." "I know him better than anyone," Harrison insisted. "I know his ambition, his desire for approval, his need to belong. Things you can't give him no matter how domestic you make his apartment look." The words stung because they echoed Sarai's own doubts. Doubts she tried to silence each night as she lay awake, listening to Christopher breathe in. The room next door. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Vale?" she asked. Harrison reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "A solution that benefits everyone, especially your daughter." Sarai didn't take the envelope. "I'm not interested in your money. This isn't just money," Harrison said, placing the envelope on the coffee table. "It's security, for you and the child, a trust fund that activates on her 18th birthday. College tuition, a house in a good neighborhood, enough to ensure you never have to worry about finances again." "In exchange for what?" Sarai asked, though she already knew the answer. "Distance," Harrison said simply. "You and Christopher can co-parent, of course, but this cohabitation, this pretense of a relationship, it ends. You move back to your own place, live your own life. Christopher returns to his responsibilities." Sarai stared at the envelope, hating how tempting it sounded. Financial security, something she'd never had, something she desperately wanted for her daughter. "And if I refuse," Harrison's expression hardened, "then things become more difficult for everyone." "Are you threatening me?" Sarai asked, anger rising. Not at all. Harrison smiled, a cold, calculating smile. I'm simply stating facts. The veil. Family has significant influence in this city, influence that can open doors and or close them. Before Sarai could respond, the elevator doors opened again. Christopher walked in, his expression changing from tired to furious in an instant when he saw his father. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. Harrison turned calmly. "Having a chat with the mother of my grandchild." "Is that a crime?" Christopher strode across the room, positioning himself between Sarai and his father. "You weren't invited, and you're upsetting Sarai." "I'm fine," Sarai said, though her voice betrayed her. Christopher spotted the envelope on the coffee table. "What's this?" When neither Sarai nor Harrison answered, Christopher picked it up, opening it to reveal legal documents and a check with more zeros than Sarai had ever seen. "You're buying her off?" Christopher's voice was dangerously quiet. "After everything I've told you about our relationship?" "I'm securing the child's future," Harrison corrected. "Something you seem unable to do without drama and media attention." "Get out," Christopher said, tearing the check in half. "Now." Harrison looked between them, his expression calculating. "This isn't over, Christopher. You know I'm right. You're just too infatuated to see it clearly." "I said get out." Christopher's voice rose, startling both Sarai and Harrison with its force. For a moment, father and son stared at each other, years of tension crackling between them. Then, without another word, Harrison turned and walked to the elevator. "Think about what I said," he directed at Sarai. "Both of you." When the doors closed behind him, Christopher turned to Sarai, his face etched with concern. "Are you okay? What did he say to you?" Sarai told him everything, watching his expression darken with each word. When she finished, Christopher sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "I'm so sorry," he said. "My father, he doesn't understand what we have." "And what do we have, Christopher?" Sarai asked softly. The question that had been hanging between them for months, unasked, unanswered. Christopher looked into her eyes, and for once, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. "Something I've never had before, something real." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Sarai didn't want to pull away. Despite all her doubts, all her fears, she wanted this, wanted him, with a certainty that terrified her. Their lips met softly at first, then with growing intensity. Months of tension, of careful distance, of unspoken feelings poured into the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I'm falling in love with you, Sarai West," Christopher whispered. "And it scares the hell out of me." Sarai smiled through sudden tears. "Me too, on both counts." As Christopher pulled her close again, Sarai knew that Harrison Vale was partially right. She and Christopher were from different worlds. But what he couldn't understand, what perhaps even Christopher and Sarai were just beginning to understand, was that sometimes different worlds collide to create something entirely new, something worth fighting for. Their daughter kicked between them, as if in agreement. A new life, a new beginning, a bridge between worlds that had never touched before. And in that moment, with Christopher's arms around her and their daughter moving beneath her heart, Sarai allowed herself to hope, not for fairy tales or happily ever afters, but for something real, something lasting, something they would build together one day at a time. The final weeks of Sarai's pregnancy brought changes neither she nor Christopher could have predicted. After Harrison Vale's failed attempt to buy her off, a strange peace settled over them. Christopher's open declaration of his feelings had broken down the last of Sarai's carefully constructed walls. They were no longer just two people thrown together by circumstance, but a couple facing the future, and Harrison Vale together. "Move in with me," Christopher had said one evening as they sat on his balcony, watching the Atlanta sunset. "Not just temporarily, for real." Sarai had looked at him, searching his face for doubt. "Are you sure? Your father—" "We'll have to accept it," Christopher finished. "I'm done letting him control my life. I want you here, both of you." He placed a gentle hand on her now large belly. It hadn't been an easy decision for Sarai. Independence had been her safety net for so long. But love, she was learning, required courage. The courage to need someone, to let them need you. So she'd given up her apartment, officially moved into Christopher's penthouse, and begun to create a home for their soon-to-arrive daughter. The nursery they designed together became a symbol of their merging worlds. Elegant but warm, with a rocking chair Sarai had found at a thrift store, sitting comfortably beside a custom-made crib Christopher had ordered from Italy. Harrison made his displeasure known in subtle ways. Invitations to Vale family events mysteriously excluded Sarai. Christopher's sister Eliza reported that their father had begun speaking of Christopher's temporary infatuation at family dinners. But to his credit, Christopher never wavered. He declined every invitation that didn't include Sarai, refused to discuss their relationship with his father, and focused entirely on preparing for their daughter's arrival. "He'll come around eventually," Christopher said one night as they lay in bed, his hand tracing patterns on Sarai's stomach. "Once he meets her, sees her, how could he not fall in love with her?" Sarai wasn't so sure. Harrison Vale didn't strike her as a man easily swayed by a baby's smile, even his own granddaughter's. But she kept that thought to herself, not wanting to dampen Christopher's hope for reconciliation. At 8 months pregnant, Sarai began keeping a journal, letters to their daughter that chronicled her hopes, fears, and dreams for the child growing inside her. She wrote about her own childhood, the loneliness of foster care, the strength she'd found in herself. She wrote about Christopher, how they'd met, how her feelings had grown from wariness to respect to love. "What are you always writing in that book?" Christopher asked one evening, finding her curled up in the window seat, pen moving across the page. "Letters to our daughter," Sarai explained, "so she'll know our story someday. The real story, not the tabloid version." Christopher sat beside her, his expression soft. "Can I read them?" Sarai hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet. Maybe after she's born. They're pretty personal." Christopher nodded, respecting her privacy. "I think it's beautiful that you're doing that. She'll treasure it someday." The next day, Christopher left for a 3-day business trip to Chicago. He'd postponed it twice already, unwilling to leave Sarai so close to her due date, but the meetings couldn't be delayed any longer. "I'll be back before you know it," he promised, kissing her goodbye at the door. And Dr. Martinez said first, "Babies are usually late, remember? You've still got 3 weeks." "I know," Sarai assured him. "We'll be fine. Go close your deal." But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The first contraction hit Sarai the very next morning as she was making tea. It was mild enough that she dismissed it as Braxton Hicks, the practice contractions Dr. Martinez had told her about. But when another one came 20 minutes later, slightly stronger, Sarai felt a flicker of concern. "It's too early," she told herself, rubbing her back as she paced the penthouse. "Just false labor." By noon, the contractions were coming every 15 minutes, strong enough to make Sarai pause and breathe deeply through them. She called Dr. Martinez's office, described her symptoms. "It could be false labor," the nurse told her. "But with the regularity of the contractions, I'd feel better if you came in to be checked." Sarai glanced at the clock. Christopher's meetings would be going all day. She didn't want to worry him unnecessarily. "I'll call a car," she decided. "If it's real labor, I'll let him know." But as she was gathering her purse and phone, Sarai realized her journal was missing. She always kept it on her bedside table, but it wasn't there. After searching the bedroom and living room, she remembered. She'd taken it to the clinic yesterday for her checkup, wanting to write while she waited. It must have fallen out of her bag. "I'll get it later," she told herself as another contraction gripped her. The journal seemed trivial compared to the possibility that her baby was coming weeks early. At the clinic, Dr. Martinez confirmed what Sarai had begun to suspect. She was in labor, already 4 centimeters dilated. "But I'm only 36 weeks, Sarai protested, as if the doctor could somehow reverse the process. "It's a little early, but not dangerously so," Dr. Martinez assured her. "The baby's lungs are developed, and she's a good size. But we need to get you to the hospital now." "I need to call Christopher," Sarai said, reaching for her phone. But in the rush to get to the hospital, the call went unmade. The contractions intensified rapidly, requiring all of Sarai's focus and energy. By the time she was settled in a hospital room, hooked up to monitors that tracked her contractions and the baby's heartbeat, she was in too much pain to operate her phone. "I can call him for you," offered the nurse, a kind-faced woman named Rita. "No signal in here," Sarai gasped between contractions. "Try his office." She recited the number from memory, but Christopher was in meetings all day, his phone turned off. The messages Rita left went straight to voicemail. As the hours passed and labor progressed, Sarai found herself facing her greatest fear, being alone when she needed someone most. The pain was worse than she'd imagined, each contraction a wave. That threatened to pull her under. The nurses were kind, the doctor attentive, but they weren't Christopher. "You're doing great," Rita encouraged her. 7 centimeters already. "I need Christopher," Sarai whispered, tears mixing with sweat on her face. "Please find him." Rita squeezed her hand. "We're trying, honey. We're trying." Meanwhile, across town at the clinic, Christopher's journal lay where it had fallen, beneath a chair in the waiting room. The cleaning staff had found it during their evening rounds, placed it in the lost and found box behind the reception desk, and there it might have stayed, if not for Tasha, who was working late filing insurance claims. During a coffee break, she noticed the familiar leather-bound book in the box. "Isn't this Sarai's?" she asked the receptionist. "She writes in it all the time." The receptionist shrugged. "Found under a chair. No name in it." Tasha picked it up, flipped it open. The first page confirmed her suspicion. It was addressed to "My dearest daughter." "Definitely Sarai's. I'll get it back to her," Tasha decided, tucking the journal into her purse. She tried calling Sarai's cell phone but got no answer. Not surprising, given how spotty reception was in Christopher's high-rise. "I'll drop it. By tomorrow," Tasha told herself, finishing her shift and heading home. She might have done just that, if not for the call she received the next morning from Rita, her cousin who worked as a labor and delivery nurse at Atlanta Memorial. "You know Sarai West, right?" Rita asked without preamble. "Your friend from the clinic?" "Yes," Tasha confirmed, instantly alert. "Why?" "She's here, in labor. Came in yesterday afternoon, and we can't reach the baby's father. She's asking for him, but his phone's off." "Christopher Vale," Tasha supplied. "He's out of town on business." "Well, she needs someone," Rita said firmly. "She's doing this all alone, and she's scared. The baby's coming early." "I'll be right there," Tasha promised, already reaching for her keys. Then she remembered the journal in her purse. "Wait, I have something of hers. Maybe it'll help." At his hotel in Chicago, Christopher was just wrapping up the final meeting of his trip when his assistant burst into the conference room. "Mr. Vale, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an emergency call from Atlanta. A woman named Tasha. She says it's about Sarai." Christopher's heart dropped. He excused himself immediately, taking the call in the hallway. "What's happened?" he demanded. "Sarai's in labor," Tasha informed him. "At Atlanta Memorial. She's been there since yesterday afternoon. They've been trying to reach you." "Yesterday?" Christopher checked his watch in alarm. "That's impossible. She's not due for 3 more weeks. Babies come when they want to," Tasha said. "She's asking for you. She needs you, Christopher." "I'm on my way," he promised, already calculating. The next commercial flight wouldn't leave for hours. "Tell her I'm coming." He hung up, immediately dialing another number. "I need the company jet ready in 30 minutes, he told his pilot. "Family emergency." As his driver rushed him to the airport, Christopher tried calling the hospital, but could only reach the general information desk. They confirmed Sarai was a patient, but could give no details about her condition. The 90-minute flight back to Atlanta was the longest of Christopher's life. He paced the cabin, checked his watch every few minutes, cursed himself for leaving town so close to Sarai's due date. When the plane finally landed, Christopher didn't wait for his luggage. He took the first taxi he could find, directing the driver to Atlanta Memorial with a promise of a hefty tip for speed. At the hospital, he ran to the information desk. "Sarai West," he said, out of breath. "She's in labor. I'm the father." The receptionist directed him to the maternity ward on the 4th floor. Christopher took the stairs, too impatient to wait for the elevator. At the nurse's station, he was met by a woman in blue scrubs. "Mr. Vale, I'm Rita. I've been taking care of Sarai." "How is she, the baby?" Christopher asked, fear evident in his voice. "She's progressing well, fully dilated now. The baby's heartbeat is strong, But Sarai's exhausted. She's been in labor for over 24 hours. Can I see her? Rita nodded. Of course, but first, someone wanted to give you this. She gestured to Tasha, who approached with Sarai's journal in hand. She dropped this at the clinic, Tasha explained. I think she'd want you to have it now. Christopher took the journal, confused about why it mattered in this moment. But before he could ask, a cry of pain echoed from down the hall. That's Sarai, Rita said. Come with me. In the labor room, Sarai lay propped up on pillows, her face flushed with exertion, her hair damp with sweat. The sight of her so vulnerable, so strong, made Christopher's heart constrict. Sarai, he said, rushing to her side. She turned at the sound of his voice, relief flooding her face. Christopher, you came. Of course I came, he said, taking her hand. I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. My phone was off during the meetings and— It doesn't matter, Sarai interrupted, wincing as another contraction began. You're here now.